No one ever thought Paul McCartney could hate anyone until now. He's the nice Beatle. He's the voice behind the famous song Yesterday. He's the man who sang about love and peace. But now, at 82 years old, that peaceful time is over. He's finally telling everyone about 6 bands that made fun of him, copied him, and tried to be better than him. One band even had the nerve to say they were bigger than the Beatles. And when you hear which bands they are, you'll see a totally different side of Paul McCartney. A side the world never knew about before. Right at the very top of Paul McCartney's hate list sits the Rolling Stones. Yep, you heard that right, the famous bad boys of rock and roll. Everyone always thought it was just a friendly competition between the two bands. But Paul never saw it that way at all. He thought the Stones stole his band's sound. He thought they stole their image. He even thought they stole their timing for releasing songs. It all started back in the late 1960s. This was when the Beatles were changing music with every single record they made. Paul would spend entire nights in the recording studio working on albums like Revolver. He was trying new things. He experimented with backwards guitars and brand new harmonies that no one had heard before. Then, just a few months later, the Rolling Stones dropped their album called Aftermath. Suddenly, their music was full of sitters and the exact same kind of sound tricks. Paul was really, really angry. He told his friends, "The Stones are always copying us. They're never the ones leading. They're always following." Then came the real insult that made Paul even more mad. After Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band became the most creative and ambitious album ever made in music history, the Rolling Stones released their own album called Their Satanic Majesty's Request. The colorful kaleidoscope cover design, the trippy and psychedelic lyrics, the crazy costumes, it was like looking in a mirror. It looked exactly like what the Beatles had just done. Paul was so mad that he reportedly slammed the record down hard onto a table at Abbey Road Studios and shouted, "They even stole the bloody cover." Many years later, Paul still wasn't over it. He still felt angry about it. In 2021, he gave an interview to the New Yorker magazine. He said, "The Stones are just a blues cover band. Our net was cast a bit wider." What he meant was that the Beatles did way more different types of music. That comment burned through the whole music industry like wildfire. Mick Jagger, the lead singer of the Stones, just laughed it off when he was on stage. He said, "Paul's adorable, but we're still out here playing stadiums to huge crowds." But behind all the jokes, the bitterness and anger stayed strong. Studio engineers who work in recording studios say that Paul refuses to even talk about the Stones, even today. He'll happily praise Elvis Presley. He'll talk about Bob Dylan. He'll even praise John Lennon, who was his partner in the Beatles. But whenever someone brings up Mick Jagger and Keith Richards from the Stones, Paul just goes completely quiet. He won't say a word, and that silence tells you everything you need to know about how he really feels. Coming in second on Paul McCartney's blacklist are the Sex Pistols. And this one wasn't even about the music they made. It was totally personal. These guys didn't just reject the Beatles and their music. They actually mocked them right to their faces in person. It all went down in early 1977 at a place called AR Studios in London. Paul was there recording music with his band Wings. That's when he ran into the Sex Pistols in the hallway. Paul smiled in a friendly way and said, "Hello." But Sid Vicious, the bass player from the Sex Pistols, looked him dead in the eye. He didn't smile back. Instead, he muttered, "You're just another establishment sellout." What he meant was that Paul had sold out and wasn't cool anymore. Paul completely froze. He couldn't believe what he just heard. No one, not even John Lennon, who often argued with him, had ever spoken to him like that before. Paul turned around, walked away, and never acknowledged the Sex Pistols again, not once. To Paul, punk music was just chaos pretending to be art. He called their sound an assault on the ears. He couldn't understand how young kids were worshiping and loving musicians who barely even knew how to play 3 chords on a guitar. But the Sex Pistols didn't care what Paul thought. Johnny Rotten, their lead singer, called Paul a fossil in a velvet suit. He was making fun of the very image and style that McCartney had spent many years carefully building and protecting. The Sex Pistols laughed at the Beatles' soft, happy songs. They said those songs were music for your grandma. They thought it was old people's music. What made it sting and hurt even worse was that the media and newspapers loved the drama. They ate it up. McCartney tried to act like it didn't bother him. He said years later, "It wasn't my thing, but maybe it cleared the air." But everyone knew the truth. He still held a grudge. He still felt angry about it. Paul could handle music critics writing bad reviews. But being humiliated and embarrassed in his own recording studio, that one left a deep scar that never healed. Coming in third on Paul's "You've Got to Be Kidding Me" list is Oasis. Yeah, those loud, cocky brothers from Manchester, England, who thought they were the second coming of the Beatles. And for Paul McCartney, that was exactly the whole problem right there. In the mid-1990s, when Britpop music was roaring back and becoming popular again, Noel and Liam Gallagher started calling themselves the New Beatles. They wore the same style haircuts as the Beatles. They copied the album covers. They bragged to every single journalist who would listen to them. Noel even said in interviews, if it weren't for the Beatles, there'd be no Oasis. That sounds like a nice compliment, right? Well, not to Paul. He didn't see it that way at all. Paul saw it as imitation just dressed up as admiration. It was copying pretending to be respect. Behind closed doors, when reporters weren't around, he called their music loud and self-important. He said, they were just a band playing dress up with history. The tension and anger exploded in 1996. That's when Noel told MTV in an interview, "We are bigger than the Beatles." That was it. That was the final straw. McCartney reportedly laughed out loud, shook his head in disbelief, and said to a friend, "They copied the chords, not the soul." What he meant was they copied the notes but not the meaning and feeling behind the music. From that day forward, Paul refused to take them seriously. He didn't hate that they were successful. He hated the arrogance and cockiness. Oasis acted like they owned the legacy and history they had just borrowed from someone else. At Glastonbury Music Festival, when Liam swaggered onto the stage wearing round John Lennon-style glasses, McCartney was watching from home on TV. He muttered under his breath, "Even the glasses." He was annoyed they were copying everything. Paul later joked on the radio, "They remind me of us, except we could actually play our instruments properly." Over the years that followed, Noel tried to make peace and fix things. He started calling Paul a hero in interviews. But the damage was already done. It was too late. McCartney never collaborated or worked with them on any music. He never joined any tribute shows they invited him to. He once said in an interview, "You can't inherit greatness. You've got to bleed for it. You have to work hard and suffer for it." And that one line said absolutely everything about how he felt. You ever wonder which band Paul McCartney called plastic musicians? Fake musicians, that honor goes to the Monkees. They're fourth on his list, and they're easily the one band he mocked and made fun of the most. To Paul, they weren't a real band at all, not even close. They were just actors pretending to be rock stars. They were created by a TV network to make money off of Beatlemania, to cash in on the Beatles' success. And it made Paul absolutely furious. He would actually turn off the radio whenever the song "I'm a Believer" came on. He'd say, "They're singing our style without earning it, without working hard for it the way we did." What really broke him and made him the angriest was 1967. This was right after Sgt. Pepper's album blew up and became huge. Suddenly, the Monkees went psychedelic too. They started wearing colorful outfits. They used surreal and weird visuals. They wrote flower power hippie lyrics. To Paul, it felt like straight-up theft, like they were stealing from him. George Harrison, the guitar player from the Beatles, once remembered Paul pacing back and forth in the studio. Paul was ranting and yelling, "They're stealing our bloody blueprint, our whole plan and style." That was the exact moment McCartney stopped seeing them as harmless imitators. He started seeing them as complete frauds, as fakes, and things got really awkward really fast. At a party in Los Angeles, California, the Monkees frontman Mickey Dolenz tried to strike up a friendly conversation with Paul. Paul looked at him. He smiled just a tiny bit. Then he walked away right in the middle of Mickey talking. He just left him standing there. Dolenz later said in interviews, "I don't think Paul ever saw us as real musicians at all." Even many decades later, Paul's attitude about them never softened. He never changed his mind. When a reporter asked him in 2011 about the Monkees, he replied with that famous smirk on his face. He said, "Catchy tunes, but certainly no Beatles." The smile on his face said, "No hard feelings." But the tone of his voice said the complete opposite. Fifth on McCartney's secret hate list were the Bee Gees, and this one cut way deeper than just pride. It hurt more than just his ego. Paul didn't just dislike their music. He hated what they represented and stood for. They were the living proof that his era was fading away, that his time was ending. By the late 1970s, disco music had taken over the entire world. The movie Saturday Night Fever ruled the music charts. The Bee Gees, the three Gibb brothers, were absolutely everywhere you looked. On records, on the radio, in films. Their high falsetto harmonies dominated the exact same airwaves that the Beatles once owned and controlled. Paul couldn't stand it. He couldn't handle it. He told Wings guitarist Lawrence Juber, "It's the same three chords as everyone else plays, just faster." He was trying to make a joke, but behind that joke was real envy, real jealousy. The Bee Gees had shattered and broken sales records that once belonged to the Beatles, records the Beatles had set. Things got really icy and cold in 1979. Both bands were recording music in Miami, Florida, at the same time. Word spread around that Paul deliberately rescheduled his recording sessions just to avoid running into the Bee Gees. An engineer who worked at the recording studio said, "You could feel the tension in the air." The Bee Gees were celebrating another huge hit song, and Paul just stared down at the floor. He looked sad and angry. He hated being reminded that the spotlight had moved on to someone else. The Bee Gees never said a single bad word about Paul. They always spoke respectfully about him. But Paul's silence spoke volumes. It said everything. For someone who had once ruled the music charts and been #1, watching a new kind of pop perfection rise up and take over must have been absolute torture. Last on McCartney's hate list, and maybe the most complicated and confusing one, were the Beach Boys. This wasn't just about envy or jealousy. This was the kind of feeling that sneaks up on you slowly. It happens when someone else touches perfection before you do, when they get there first. Back in 1966, when the Beach Boys' album Pet Sounds came out, Paul was completely blown away. He was amazed. He called the song "God Only Knows" the most beautiful song ever written in the history of music. But that admiration and respect soon twisted and turned into obsession. He became obsessed with it. Paul told his producer George Martin, "We've got to top this. We have to make something better." The result of that obsession was Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and it worked. The album was a massive success, but deep down inside, Paul knew the truth. He knew that Pet Sounds had lit the fire. It had inspired him and pushed him to do better. Then Brian Wilson, the creative genius behind the Beach Boys, started working on an album called Smile. It was a project so ambitious and creative that it terrified everyone who heard about it. Paul followed the recording sessions very closely. He paid attention to everything Brian was doing. He even dropped by the studio once to play a carrot, like a percussion instrument during a recording. It was meant to be a funny gag. When Brian Wilson later scrapped and abandoned the whole album because he was having mental breakdowns and struggling with his mental health, Paul's sympathy didn't last long. He reportedly said something cold, "If you can't finish what you start, you shouldn't be in this business." It was harsh, but it was honest. That's how Paul really felt. The real tension came later that same year, at a dinner party in Los Angeles. Paul made a cutting and mean remark about the Beach Boys' new tracks. He said they were simplistic, too simple. Brian Wilson went completely silent for days after that. He was hurt. That one comment really stuck with him. It bothered him deeply. Fans of both bands noticed something. Brian stopped mentioning Paul's name for many years after that. He just stopped talking about him. Even decades later, McCartney still couldn't give the Beach Boys full credit. He couldn't admit how good they were without adding something negative. He'd praise God only knows. But then he'd add, for American pop of that time. He always added a qualifier, something to make it seem less impressive. Maybe Paul didn't actually hate the Beach Boys at all. Maybe he just hated that they once inspired him more than he ever wanted to admit or confess, that they influenced him more than he wanted anyone to know. So, what do you think about all this? Were Paul's grudges and long-held anger justified and fair? Or was he simply tired of being copied over and over again by other bands? Tell us your honest thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that bell icon for more untold stories from music's biggest legends and most famous stars.